So our minds, it turns out, are pretty good at playing tricks on us. You know how sometimes you will walk into a room and completely forget what you were doing or why you walked into that room? Anybody had that experience? Anybody had that experience this morning before you even came to church? Some of you are like, I don't know why I'm in this room. I forgot what I'm doing here. Of course you have had that experience. We all know that feeling because we've all done that. Well, it turns out that your brain is doing that to you on purpose. See, because researchers have actually discovered that our brains, they treat the physical experience and the visual cue of walking through a doorway as a signal that it's time to start a new chapter, right? And so what happens is your brain conveniently at that moment archives everything that came before. And so you walk through a door and it's like, okay, fresh start. This is something new. And you didn't want that to happen, right? You walked in there because it's a continuation of the thing you're doing. Have you ever been like absolutely confident and sure about a memory that you had of an event only to actually discover, to go back to watch the video or to see the pictures, and you were arguing with somebody, but then you watched it and you realized that your memory of that event was completely off? That ever happened to anybody? That happens to me all the time, and it seems to happen as you post 50, let's say. But the confidence, it turns out, and accuracy aren't the same thing, right? But our brains act as if they are. Or have you ever overestimated the impact that a situation or experience was going to have on you, or how long it would affect you, whether it was good or bad, right? Because we tend to think that way. Like, when I get this new job, or when I get that new car, when this thing happens, man, I'll just be so happy. I'll never be stressed out again. It's going to be awesome forever and ever and ever. If I could just get the new iPhone, right? And that lasts for about 3 hours or whatever when you get your new iPhone. Or on the negative side, like, I hate that I'm losing this job and it's going to be horrible, and I guess I'll just be stressed out forever and I'm just doomed to struggle for the rest of my life. But then the new job or that new thing, it isn't as great as you thought it would be, and the joy doesn't last nearly as long as you'd hoped it would, or the bad thing that you were dreading happens, and it was hard, of course, but you're fine. And yeah, there was some stress and struggle, but it really wasn't the end of the world, and then things settled down quicker than you expected. And the reason that happens is because our minds are bad at predicting the future, and they're also bad at predicting how we will feel or respond to whatever future actually happens. And so it exaggerates the highs in anticipation of it. It exaggerates the lows in anticipation of it. It exaggerates the positives and the negatives. See, the truth is, your mind is tricky, and it's playing a lot of games with you. And it doesn't mean to. It's trying to be fast and efficient. It's trying to be protective of you. And so what it does is, all day, every day, it guesses and it fills in the gaps and it begins to tell stories, and they're very convincing about what it is that's happening and why it's happening. In short, your mind is always interpreting what's going on around you. And the scary part for all of us is our minds don't like being wrong. And so they don't just interpret what's going on around us, they stubbornly defend those interpretations. They will defend them in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. No matter how off they are, sometimes when we interpret something, our brains will defend it, our minds will defend it no matter what. Like, have you ever known somebody who stuck to their version of events even after it was obvious to everybody else around them that their version wasn't accurate, that they were wrong and it wasn't true? Why did they do that? This is why. Because their brain interpreted it a certain way, and their brain is really stubborn. It doesn't want to be wrong, so it defends that interpretation no matter what. So last week we began this series called Mind Games, talking about how our minds literally play games on us all the time, not just when it comes to walking into rooms and forgetting our keys or whatever, but when it comes to the most important stuff in life, when it comes to our relationships, when it comes to who we are, and especially when it comes to faith and God and how we relate to one another and how we relate to God. And so we began with this verse in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, and we're going to kind of circle back to it off and on all month, but it says this, it says, above all else, guard your heart, for it determines the course of your life. And last week we spent some time in this a little bit, but just to recap, for us, our heart usually just means emotions. But in Scripture, God uses the word heart to mean the control center, the internal control center of our lives. And at the center of that is very much the way that you and I think. And because the way that we think will determine what goes on in our hearts, and our hearts determine the course of our life. And so all month long, we're not just talking about the way that we think, we're actually talking about these specific mind games that we all struggle with. And so last week we talked about this idea of guilt and how it's short-circuiting our lives. And if you weren't here, man, I just encourage you, go back, grab the podcast. You can find the video of the sermon on YouTube. You can go to Spotify or wherever podcasts are and find the audio version as well. Have you ever had a time where you got talked into doing something that you didn't want to do? Where the people were like, man, you got to do this. You're going to love it. It's going to be awesome. And then you did it, and it wasn't awesome. It was just exactly like you expected it to be. You didn't love it. And in the middle of it, they were like, see, man, this is awesome, right? You're loving it. And you just wanted it to be over, and so you lied and said it was awesome. And so now, because you did say that, they keep wanting you to do it with them again. So, I'm not a fan of escape rooms, at all. They're not my vibe. They're not my jam. I don't enjoy it. I don't know why, but there's not really anything fun or enjoyable about an escape room to me. I've been a bunch of times. I've done a bunch of different versions. It always feels the same. It always feels like homework. I'm like, I paid money for this? Or almost always they require you to find at least one, key, and I can't help but feel like I paid money to simulate the experience of losing my keys. And it's like, why would I pay money for that, right? And just all the angst that goes along with it, and the panic, what if we don't find the key? The only time I ever went willingly to an escape room was the very first time. Every other time I've been, after that, it's because I got talked into it. And I know we all like to think of ourselves as strong and independent people who aren't really impacted or influenced by what other people think and feel. And, we'd never compromise. And we won't compromise what we think or feel or who we are just to fit in or be accepted. But the truth is that's just not really reality, right? Because we've all had moments where we pretended to be somebody that we're not so that someone would like us. And ironically, in those moments, if they do like us, the person that they like isn't even us, because we were pretending to like something we didn't like, right? But we've all made little compromises for the sake of connection, for being in relationship. In fact, to be sure, part of every relationship is the willingness to do some things that you don't care for because you care about the person. And it's all worth it because the friendship and the camaraderie and the connection and the love that you experience, man, it just makes life so much better. The question, though, for all of us that we need to wrestle with this morning is how often? How often do we do things just to be liked, or just to keep the peace, or just to make sure everybody's happy, or just to avoid conflict, or whatever, however you want to finish that sentence? So every time I stand in front of you, I do my best to keep it 100 when it comes to who I am and what I'm like. And so here's my confession to you this morning. I am a recovering people pleaser. And part of it is definitely that it just feels way better to be liked than disliked, right? And so I want you to like me. I want the people that I like to like me. I even want the people I don't like to like me. I want the people I know to like me. I want people I don't know to like me. And so part of it's just that reality, but there's also this pragmatic side when it comes to this idea for me as well. Because of my upbringing and my experiences with my parents getting divorced and the way my family was, I learned pretty quickly it was just easier to operate in the world. It was just easier to get your way. It was easier to get ahead. It was easier to get people to do what you want them to do. It's easier to navigate difficult situations. It's easier to deal with conflict if people like you. If they're like, man, that Randy guy, he's great. Anybody willing to admit along with me that you're kind of a recovering people pleaser this morning? A few of us. Maybe for you that word recovering doesn't even belong in that sentence yet. You're just a flat out people pleaser. So in Galatians chapter 1, verse 10, this guy named Paul was writing a letter to a group of churches, and he writes this really interesting phrase in his letter, and he says this. He says, obviously, I'm not trying to win the approval of people, but of God. I mean, what a great statement. The problem for us is the more familiar we are with the Bible, the more when we read it, the more we try to have the right response to the scripture when we read it, instead of just being honest about the real response, what's true of us. Because when you read this verse, I mean, if you feel anything at all, you know that the right response is, of course we want to win the approval of God and not of people. Of course we don't want to live our lives to win the approval of other people. But I think if we're being truthful, the real response to what Paul wrote is like, what do you mean, obviously? I don't know that there's anything obvious about it, Paul. Like, I mean, is it too much to ask to have both? Like, why can't I win the approval of God and of people? I think I can figure that out. Or maybe that's just my real response. And I'm not necessarily happy about that. I'm not really proud of that. But it is what's real. So as I was preparing for this week, to me, it felt like this is going to be the hardest week in the series to tackle, primarily because I think people-pleasing can be hard for a lot of us to admit to ourselves. I think beyond that, it can be hard for a lot of us to even see it as being a problem for us in our lives. I think most of us don't think of ourselves as people pleasers because it's not something that happens in a dramatic moment, but it happens in small, repeated decisions over and over and over again, where we choose acceptance over showing up as our authentic, real, true selves. And it's not something that we plan to do. I don't think people set out consciously, get up during the morning, get in the day and go, I'm going to go out and be a people pleaser and just figure out how I can discount myself and who I am and just be phone and just mail it in and try to, nobody does that. But it happens repeatedly. It happens lightning fast in a moment, because in an effort to be fast and efficient and protective of you, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, your mind is looking for and listening for any sort of cue that will help it make sense of and categorize whatever situation or conversation that you're walking into or that you're having. But as I said a few minutes ago, the problem is that our minds misread and misinterpret things all the time. And whether that's a facial expression or a tone of voice or a word or phrase or some sort of body language or a myriad of other things, our minds connect those things and connect those dots to previous experiences and similar situations and things that have happened to us before, and it overrides what we would have done or what we wanted to do in the moment. So instead of just speaking our minds and sharing and being open and real about what we think or what's going on with us, instead we hold back or we over-explain something because we want to try to make sure that everybody's okay and we keep the peace, or we apologize just for having any sort of preference, or we just defer and pretend like we don't have any preferences at all. It's whatever you want. Or we disappear. We try to disappear so that the other person can just, they can shine. They can step forward and they can take up the space and fill up the space, and we're just going to be over here. And we, of course, don't say those things. We have descriptions and labels and other language and words that we use to explain why we do what we do, right? Because we're like, look, I just like being the person that people can come to and depend on every time they need something, right? Yeah, it's overwhelming sometimes, but man, it's worth it. Or nobody likes the guy, nobody likes the girl who's always stirring things up and being disagreeable and won't go along with the plan. Or I'm the kind of person who always shows up for people no matter what. Or I actually try to figure out what people want before they even ask, because that's really how you prove that you care about them. Or I'm just really good at reading people. And if I can tell that they're upset, man, I'm going to do whatever I can to sort of release the tension or make them feel better or try to get inside their heads and help them, right? If they really, and besides, if they really need you, if they really need something from you, you can't say no. I mean, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? I mean, we all say some of this stuff to ourselves, some version of those things every once in a while. But when they become the predominant way that we think, when they become the role that we repeatedly take in our relationships, that's when you know you've got a problem. That's when you know that people-pleasing is taking over your life. And maybe the hardest part of all of it is if you're a Jesus follower, it can feel right and good and even Jesus-like to be and act like this. I mean, after all, Jesus was selfless, and he wants us to be selfless, right? I mean, the New Testament is full of verses about that. I mean, Jesus himself said things like, man, turn the other cheek and go the extra mile in Matthew chapter 5. This guy, Paul, that we just read, that wrote those verses in Galatians, he wrote a bunch of other parts of the New Testament. At one point, he talked about how like, he wanted to be all things to all people in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. In 1 Corinthians 10, he said, don't be concerned for your own good, be concerned for the good of other people. I mean, what do we do with all of that stuff? And then to complicate it further, there's this other side to it as well, that people-pleasing isn't always quiet and reactive and passive. Sometimes it's loud and proactive and impressive. It can morph and adapt. It doesn't always take the back seat. Sometimes it jumps out front and takes charge. It takes calculated risks and calls it courage. People-pleasing can be fun and engaging and make people laugh. But it's all for approval. It's all for admiration. It's all for acceptance. See, it's possible to lead and achieve and succeed on the outside while still being completely controlled by what other people think on the inside. You probably know somebody like that. In short, people-pleasing is this coping mechanism that we have that we use to navigate relationships and protect ourselves and get what we want and avoid conflict and achieve success and manipulate situations and control outcomes, or at least try. And if you struggle with any of this, I want you to know that you're in really good company. Because when you read the stories of Scripture, some of the most heroic and holy people in Scripture struggled with it too. Whether it was a guy named Abraham or Samson or a bunch of other people in the Old Testament or Peter in the New Testament. And so I want to take you to the story of one of the most significant and iconic people in Scripture, a guy named Moses. And his story is so big, it's in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. So today we're kind of doubling up a bit. We're going to look at both parts of his story from both the New Testament and the Old Testament. And so in the book of Acts, it says this about Moses in Acts chapter 7. Verse 20. This is, it says, at that time Moses was born, and he was no ordinary child. For 3 months he was cared for by his family. When he was placed outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as her own son. And Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. I want you to hold on to that. He was powerful in speech and action. Keep that in mind. But I love that it says that he was no ordinary child. And it's definitely telling us something about Moses, but I also think that it's telling us something about us. See, because when you were born, you were no ordinary child. You were fearfully and wonderfully made. Like Moses, there's nothing ordinary or mundane or routine about the way that God made you or about the life that he created you to live. And so it tells us that Moses was no ordinary child and that he was cared for by his family for 3 months and then was placed outside. And if you know the story, it's a little bit more complicated than that. That's like takes a bunch of the story and condenses it down a little bit. And it's because the Pharaoh in Egypt, he was afraid of the Israelites. They'd been enslaved for hundreds of years and had multiplied, and they were starting to feel like there was too many of them for the Egyptians to control. And so he ordered that all the newborn Jewish baby boys, that they should be murdered the moment that they were born. And so when Moses was born, his mama hid him. But when she could no longer hide him, she didn't know what to do, and so she made a basket, and she placed him in a basket and floated that basket down the Nile River. And they got caught up in some reeds, and Pharaoh's daughter was down washing in the river and found Moses, and they opened the basket, and he's crying and screaming his head off. And she had compassion, and she adopted him and raised him as her own son. It's an incredible story. But if you think about it from just like, that's the beginning of your story, I mean, that's pretty traumatic. That's a pretty traumatic beginning for a newborn. And so it says that Moses grows up and he's educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and it says that he was powerful in both speech and action. And that brings us to the next part of his story. And so we're going to jump back to Exodus chapter 3 in the Old Testament and pick it up. And God is having a conversation with Moses. Moses was walking. He sees a bush on fire. He walks over and he begins to talk. God begins to speak to him from inside the bush. And this is God speaking to him in verse 9. It says, "Now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." I mean, what an epic moment. God is like, I'm sick of the way that my people have been treated. I'm coming down to rescue them, and so I'm going to send you. You're going to be the man, Moses. You're going to represent me. You're going to go and set my people free. Moses, verse 11, says to God, but, okay, well, hold on, time out. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. So right out of the gate, Moses is like, oh, God, like you dialed the wrong number. I'm not your guy. And God's like, nope, I know you. I chose you. Don't worry. I'm going to be with you. And you would think like, okay, done deal, right? Not quite. In fact, Moses is just getting warmed up with all the excuses. He says this in the next verse. So Moses responds and says to God, well, hold on. Like, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what do I say? Then what do I tell them? Man, this guy, kind of whiny, kind of worried, right? What if they don't believe me? What if they start asking me questions I don't know the answer to? What if, like, what do I say? What if I don't know what to say? But God is so amazing. God answers that excuse, and he tells them exactly what to say. If they ask you who sent you, if they ask you his name, tell them this is my name. Tell them I am. Tell them I'm the one that sent you. And so then Moses counters with this in Exodus chapter 4, verse 1. He says, well, what if they don't believe me? What if they don't listen to me? And they say, the Lord did not appear to you. They're not going to believe me or listen to me, God. They're going to accuse me of lying. And so this time, God is like getting serious. So this time, God answers his doubts and his fears about what's going to happen and what could happen in these conversations with these people by performing a couple of miracles where he has them throw his staff on the ground. It turns into a serpent. And then he has them pick it back up, and it turns from a serpent back into a staff. He has them stick his hand inside his own cloak, and he pulls it out, and it's full of leprosy and dying and disease. And he sticks it back in, and he pulls it out, and it's healed. And God's like, see, I can do anything I want, Moses. Like, this is who's with you. This is who you're talking to. I got this. But Moses still, after all of that, he digs in his heels. And this is what he says in Exodus chapter 4, verse 10. Moses said to the Lord, okay, you've kind of like taken all of my excuses away, Lord, pardon me. But I've never been eloquent, neither in the past, nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. So God says, oh, I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say. Finally, Moses has just had enough. He's like, pardon your servant, Lord. Please just send somebody else. Anybody but me. Pick anybody else but me. When I read that, I thought, wait. I thought he was powerful in both speech and action. And now he's telling God, me no speak good. And even if I could speak, it ain't going to work. They're going to hate me. And God's like, don't worry, I'll teach you what to say. And finally, with the thought of facing those people and the possibility of the conflict and the rejection, it's just too much for him. And so Moses is like, look, I tried to tell you at the top of this conversation, I'm not your guy. Please send somebody else, anybody else. So what is Moses doing? Right? He's mentally rehearsing conversations and interactions with people that he's not with currently, that he hasn't even met, and that haven't even happened yet. Have you ever done that? You ever been going into a meeting? You ever been going into a conflict? You ever been getting ready to have a conversation, and you're just like, oh my gosh, and you're rehearsing, and they're going to say this, and then I'm going to say this, and then it's going to be horrible, and I don't know what to do. I mean, there's no threat, right? Because you're not there. There's no resistance yet, right? For Moses too, like he's just talking to God. Isn't it wild how often we will surrender control of our thoughts and our attitudes, our emotions, our expectations, and our actions long before there's actually any resistance or threat or demand or confrontation or conflict. Long before, none of that's happening, and we will still go to this place of like obsessing over what could happen and what might happen and what they might say and how it's going to feel. Just the anticipation of what could happen throws us for a loop. And Moses is afraid of what people will think before he even goes, before he's even opened his mouth. I mean, forget what actually happens to us. How often do we shift or change or withdraw or hide or whatever, a million other things, because of what might happen? I think we do it a lot. See, the truth is that people-pleasing often bullies us into hiding to avoid any sort of discomfort at all. This is why the way that you think is so important. And it's why taking time to think about the way that you think is even more important. So I was reading all these like studies, medical reports, and all these things that neuroscience is discovering. And one of the things that was really interesting is neuroscience tells us that we form thought patterns based on our memories and experiences of things that we've been through. And those thought patterns actually become these templates for how we act and approach every situation. They become our default mode of how we operate. They dictate the way that we think about ourselves, the way that we think about other people, right? Like they're the reason why we think, well, this is the way people are. This is the way they operate. This is just who I am. This is the way that I connect with people. This is what love looks like. This is how I just handle things. See, your mind interprets or misinterprets a situation, and then what it does is, based on that interpretation, it goes back into its memory bank, and it goes, it's filing through all the templates for what needs to happen, and it selects the template that it feels like best suits this situation from the archives in your mind. And then like a hard drive loading and running a computer program, it runs that template, which drives how you're going to think and respond and act and feel in that situation. And almost all of it operates behind the scenes without us really paying much attention to it at all. I mean, and so as I was reading, I started thinking, like, I wonder how many of my actions, how many of my reactions are actually being dictated by faulty thought templates that are just stored in my brain, my brain misperceiving a cue and running a template. And so I just know that if this happens, this is the way I respond. I wonder how much for you, how much of what you think of as your personality or the way that you're just wired is actually your mind playing mind games with you. In fact, in the report, it says, for some of us, upwards of 70% of what we think of as our personality is really just these thought templates that we've learned that run in our hard drive. And they may or may not be true. See, I think it's possible that this is exactly what's happening with Moses. See, I think you should actually go back when you get home, go back to Exodus and read Exodus 1, 2, and 3. Read his backstory. Read the moments that led up to this. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, he was born into a world of instability, a world of slavery and oppression and violence, of murder. He was separated from his family and from his people when he was 3 months old. He grows up, even though he's a Hebrew, he grows up as an Egyptian, and so he has this massive identity crisis. And when he's a young man, he tries to take matters into his own hands to help out a fellow Jewish man who's being beaten by an Egyptian. And he totally screws it up. He ends up murdering the Egyptian. And on top of that, the Jewish people that were around were like, dude, what are you doing? This just made things worse for us. Get out of here. We don't need your help. And so he runs away from everything and everyone, and he goes as far away as he can, and he starts over somewhere else as a shepherd. What's interesting to me about Moses' story is that on top of everything else, people-pleasing causes us to elevate what other people think above what God says. See, God had this long conversation with Moses. And God's like, I'm sending you, and I'm with you, and I'll teach you what to say, and look at what I could do with you, and you won't be alone, and you don't have to do it alone, and I want you to go. And every time Moses is like, yeah, but they might, and yeah, but what if, and yeah, but they're gonna, and they won't believe, and then they're gonna hate me, and then they're gonna accuse me of lying, and then it's just gonna go sideways. And this thought template is just running through his mind. And all of a sudden, what he's expecting them to say is more important than what God is saying to them. I mean, think about how absurd it is. Moses is arguing with God, who's appearing to him in a physical form as a bush that's on fire but not being consumed. Talk about feeling like a crazy person. If you haven't argued with a shrub, okay? But he's arguing with God, the God who made him, the God who knows him, the God who knows him better than he knows himself, the God who called him, the God who chose him. And it's almost as if like he's going, God, you don't understand who I am. You don't know what I've been through. Man, my mom abandoned me when I was 3 months old. All the people that I was born with and around, all the babies that were born, they were all murdered. You don't understand, man. Like I grew up in a home. I spoke a different language. I learned a different culture. That's not even who I was. I have all this guilt because my people were out there as slaves and I'm sitting in the palace in luxury. You don't understand. God, I tried it. I tried to help. I tried to do my part, and it's super sideways, and I killed somebody, and now it's just, I'm done with that. You don't understand who I am or what I've been through. Can you imagine arguing with God? Of course you can. I know I can because you have, and I have. We try to tell the God who knows everything what he doesn't know. What if there are people and places and things that God has for you that you're missing out on simply because they're not even an option in your head? I mean, there's nothing wrong with being a shepherd unless you're supposed to be the deliverer. See, this conversation really isn't about like if you're an introvert being more extroverted, or if you're just kind of a meek and gentle person that you need to be more bold and loud and forceful. It's not really about that. It's about all of us actually learning to show up in whatever environment, in whatever relationship, in whatever, like wherever our life leads, as ourselves, understanding that God, who he created us to be, us learning to listen to God's voice and follow what he says above what other people think or say. It's about breaking free of the mind game of people pleasing. And it's about not letting what anybody thinks or says override what God thinks or says in our lives. And ultimately, it's not just about what we do, but it's about why we do it. See, when you read the scriptures, God repeatedly tells us over and over and over again that our motives matter. That what we do matters, but why we do it matters more. That's why God says of religious people that, oh, you're doing the right things, you're honoring me with your lips, but your hearts are far from me. It looks good on the outside. It looks good on the outside, like all the church services and all the beliefs and you know all the right answers, but inside you're full of darkness and brokenness and mess. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 3, the Apostle Paul wrote these words. He says, if I give all that I possess to the poor and I give over my body to hardship so that I could boast, like look at what I've done, look at the sacrifice I've made, but I do not have love, I gain nothing. I mean, what's he saying? He's saying that not everything that looks like love on the outside is actually love. Some of what we're taught to call love is actually fear in disguise. See, if what you do for others, you do it because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't, that's not love, no matter how sacrificial on the outside it looks like. And see, that's the tricky part of this whole conversation is you can have two people side by side doing the same things, and one is being loving and one isn't. One is showing up in faith and courage and love, and the other is showing up out of obligation and fear and manipulation. And this is maybe the hardest part of this conversation, is that there's nothing noble or virtuous or spiritual about compulsive kindness or sacrifice that's motivated by dysfunction or fear instead of love. That's exactly what Paul just said. If I do all these things, all this kindness, all this sacrifice, but if I didn't have love in me when I was doing it, it doesn't even count. It's worthless. I didn't gain anything. It didn't make the world better. Because our actions in those moments, if they're not motivated by love, they're more about us looking good or protecting ourselves or kind of maneuvering the other person into a position that we want them to or controlling the situation. It's about all that stuff. It's not really about serving them or meeting their needs or demonstrating love to them. In fact, you know this, right? Like you know this, that there are a lot of situations where love would require us to behave in a way that the other person might not actually think or would perceive as being loving. Because you have to draw a boundary, or you got to tell them no, or you have to speak truth to them, or you got to stop enabling them, or whatever, a million other things. And that doesn't feel like love to them, but it's the most loving thing you could do. But we often avoid that because of the discomfort it causes. There's friction. We don't like the friction. See, the uncomfortable reality for all of us is that you cannot overcome people-pleasing without beginning to cultivate the courage to disappoint people. That there's just going to be this reality. If you show up as you, if you take up space as who God created you to be, if you step fully into the life and the calling and the things that he has for you to do and the way that he wants you to serve your family and your neighbors and at your job and lead in your life and show up at church, like that's not always going to happen in a way where everybody goes, look at how loving they are. Because if they're a people pleaser, they'll be like, why are you being so difficult? Why can't you just go back to just getting along, man? So then how do we actually begin to break free of all of this? How do we move toward health? How do we move toward life and faith and hope and love? So normally I give you kind of like one simple assignment at the end of the message. But as I've moved into this series, I thought, like, these conversations are so big. I don't even know where to begin to give you a simple assignment. So I'm going to share a few things, and I hope you'll take some pictures or write these things down, take some pictures of the slides, and begin to start down this journey, because this is not something that's going to happen for you overnight. Like if you really struggle with people pleasing, if you know, like if you're a recovering people pleaser, you know that's a fight you're in every day. And so I just want to kind of give you a handful of things to begin to think about and work through. Number one, it's backup for this whole series, is that you would begin to stop and think about the way that you think. That when you get in a moment, that you would actually start to analyze the thought patterns and the thought template that's driving what you're doing and what you're thinking in a moment. That you would just start to think about, that's really interesting. I wonder why I think that. I wonder why I'm anticipating that they're going to do this when nothing has even happened yet. Number two, that you would recognize that you're caught in the mind game of people pleasing. Right? You will not do anything about it if you explain it away or justify your behavior or whatever it is that you do. Number three, that you would acknowledge that it's not about kindness or love, but about something else. That the reason you do it, you love that person, of course, but there's like codependency mixed in there and all kinds of crazy stuff and just keeping the peace and all kinds of baggage and stuff that you dragged with you from all different experiences and choices you've made and stuff that's been done to you. And so you just admit, like, I do that, and it's not really about kindness or love. It's about keeping the peace. It's not really about kindness or love. It's about making sure that I'm okay. Number four, that you would decide that loving and serving people matters more than being liked by them. And when you decide that it matters more, you're way more likely to say hard things that need to be said. Not because you're mean, but because it's the most loving thing you could do. That you can show up and serve and love them, and it matters more than whether or not they like you. Number five, that you would give yourself permission to disappoint people. finally, that you would get up every day and say, God, today I'm going to prioritize what you say above everything else that other people think and feel, including myself. I'm going to put whatever you say, whatever you want me to do. When I open the scriptures and you begin to speak to me, when you direct me and you want me to say this, or I should text this person, or I should invite them to church, or I should go and offer to pray for, the barista because she seems upset, or whatever a million things that God could be speaking to you. And your heart starts racing and you're just like, there's no way I'm going to do that. God, I'm going to prioritize what you say above what they may think or feel. I'm going to prioritize what you say above what I think or feel. I'm going to listen to you. And here's the thing that you cannot please everybody. You can't please everybody, but you can please God. How? Faith, trusting him. Hebrews chapter 6 says that without faith, it's impossible to please God. And a huge part of living a life of faith is developing this lifelong habit of trusting God's story over the story that you tell yourself. That is a huge part of faith. That you would go, God, you see what I can't see. You're not hung up. You don't have the baggage I have in this situation. God, you know me better than I know myself. You can see the future. You can see the beginning and the end. So I'm going to listen to your story. I'm going to listen to the story think about if Moses listened to the story that he was strong in word and action in the way that he speaks. That the story that God had written for him was that you are the leader. You're the man for the hour. You're the man for the job. Nothing about your life or story was an accident. It's all to lead to this moment because you're going to be strong and I'm going to be with you. Instead of believing the story that I don't really talk that good, God, I get all tongue-tied and I'm not. That you would choose a life of faith to trust God's story over your story. And I love how God's answer to Moses wasn't like cheerleading. It wasn't like, you got it, man. You can do it. I believe in you. You got this. No, he didn't say any of those things. He was like, I got this. You know what he said over and over and over again to him? I will be with you. I'll teach you what to say. You don't got to worry about that. I'm choosing you because of you, but I got this. I will be with you. You need to trust in the identity that you have in me, not in who you think you are. See, the message of Jesus is such incredibly good news because regardless of whatever your story has been, regardless of whatever the experiences have been like in your life, Jesus freely offers to every one of us this incredible identity and acceptance and love without condition, freely for all of us. That's the incredible, beautiful reality of Jesus this morning. And he's inviting you to come to him and just let him begin to download and deposit into you his heart and his identity and his acceptance and his love for you so that you don't have to go through your whole life people pleasing. Let's pray together.